Islam and Rastafari. Alright, so many Orthodox fundamentalist Muslims seem to forget about Islam's covenant with Ethiopia, aka Abyssinia. To start, in the Islamic tradition, there is a story which takes place during the time of Prophet Muhammad, where the Muslim believers in the Prophet were faced with persecution, and they received refuge in Abyssinia, aka Ethiopia, upon traveling there at the instruction of the Prophet. And this story can easily be looked up online. So to refresh the memory that the majority of modern Islamic fundamentalists have obviously forgotten about, the traditional Islamic story, as it is told and written, goes like this. When persecution against Muslims increased in Mecca, during Prophet Muhammad's initial years of prophecy, he instructed a group of them to seek protection in Abyssinia, which was ruled by a king who had a reputation for righteousness. Abyssinia, known today as Ethiopia, was ruled by a just and fair king known as King Negus. So fleeing persecution, Muslims sought a place to worship and practice their faith in peace. It is narrated that Prophet Muhammad advised a group of them to secretly immigrate to Abyssinia, for he said, quote, "Their king will not tolerate injustice," unquote. And his main aim was to allow his companions to perform their religious duties without torture and abuse. So they traveled through the Red Sea on vessels until they landed in Africa. This was the first immigration in Islam since the time of Prophet Muhammad. According to the story, around 70 to 80 Muslims traveled to Abyssinia. But the leaders of the Quraysh in Mecca were determined to go after them, out of fear that the Muslims might establish a stronghold in Africa if Abyssinians were to convert to Islam. So the Quraysh sent a delegation to Ethiopia in effort to bring the Muslims back to Mecca. They requested that the king expel them as soon as possible, claiming that the Muslims invented a religion that opposed theirs and that of King Negus. So they showered the ministers of the kings with presents, gifts, in a bid to seek their support. And so they called upon King Negus to expel the Muslims, but he refused to turn them over on his land. The Muslims were brought before the king, and they picked Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, a cousin of the Prophet, to speak to King Negus. With his eloquence and wisdom, Ja'far spoke to King Negus, saying, quote, "O king, we were people steeped in ignorance, worshipping idols, eating unsacrificed carrion, committing abominations, and the strong would devour the weak. Thus we were, until Allah, the one true God, sent us a messenger from out of our midst, whose lineage we knew, and his veracity and his worthiness of trust and his integrity," unquote. When King Negus asked Ja'far for any revelation that the Prophet had from God, he recited some Quranic verses from the Surah of Mary on the story of Jesus, recited as follows, quote, "And make mention of Mary in the book, when she withdrew from her people unto a place towards the east, and secluded herself from them. And we sent unto her our Spirit, and it appeared unto her in the likeness of a perfect man," unquote. And it is narrated that after Ja'far finished the recitation, King Negus vowed not to return the Muslim refugees back to Mecca. When Ja'far concluded his recitation, the king wanted to hear more. Ja'far obliged by reciting verses from the Quran, and King Negus replied by saying, quote, "By God, these words and the words revealed to Moses are rays of one and the same light," unquote. And that's reported by Hisham. Some accounts say that the king drew a line with his staff and proclaimed, quote, "Between your religion and ours there is really no more difference than this line," unquote. So the king returned the gifts to the Quraysh emissaries, and the Muslims received permission to stay in Abyssinia and practice their religion in peace. Okay, so during a time when the Muslims were in a very vulnerable state with the enemies of Muhammad and under exile, the Ethiopian Christians provided them with safety and friendship, and they agreed that both their faiths are essentially one and the same. And in Surah 5, Ayat 82 of the Quran, where it says, quote, "And thou wilt find the nearest in friendship to the believers to be those who say, 'We are Christians.' That is because there are priests and monks among them, and because they are not proud," unquote. The Arabic word for priest in this verse of the Quran, 582, is kisasina, rooted in the Ethiopic Amharic word for priest, which is kasi. All right, so you have kasi, kisasin, kisasina. Okay, so this is a reference to the Ethiopian Christians of King Negus of Abyssinia, who protected the Muslims during their exile when they were commanded to go to Ethiopia by Prophet Muhammad under the leadership of the Prophet's cousin Ja'far. And so, what I want to point out is, His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie is King Negus, of direct descent from the royal bloodline of the Kingdom of Abyssinia, the bloodline of Solomon and Sheba. And also, might I add, the Ethiopian Christians are the only Christians that have a different Bible that was not tampered with, altered, or written by Romans or Europeans. For example, the modern Western Bible that we have today says we're all born into sin, whereas the original Ethiopic Bible does not say that. Okay, so it's very important to understand that Rastafari is not the Western whitewashed Christianity that we know of in the world today. The Rastafari movement is not Western Christianity at all. Okay, so the particular Christians that the Quran is saying are closest to the believers in this ayat 582 are the Ethiopian Christians, these Ethiopian Christians. The Quran in this ayat is not referring to your Western European or American so-called type of Christianity when it refers to those who you'll find closest to the believers, right here in 582. It is not talking about Billy Graham, Joe Osteen, 700 Club type Christians as being closest to the believers. No, that is not who Surah 5 Ayah 82 is referring to. Rather, it is referring to the original Ethiopian Christians under King Negus, who are the closest to the believers in the Holy Quran, where it uses the word Kisasian as priest. Kasi. The Kisasian are the Ethiopian priests. And the word Ethiopia means ether utopia, a paradise of the ether. And His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie fulfills the biblical word of Christ on the Day of Judgment. Let me explain. Okay, the heavens above reveals to us that Virgo the Virgin gives birth to Leo the Lion, His Imperial Majesty, in the precession of the equinox. Haile Selassie I was born July 23rd, Leo. 23 is the resonant number of the star Sirius. And in the Quran, Surah 53, Ayah 49, it says, Allah is the Lord of Sirius. And here is the biblical fulfillment. His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie of Ethiopia was invaded by Italy before World War II started. This is in accordance with the biblical story of the Romans persecuting Christ. The Italians are the Romans, who persecuted His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie, and they were prompted by certain interests, just like in the biblical story of the Jews prompting the Romans, the Italians, to persecute Christ. And as the story teaches us, He still lives to this very day. He is still alive. His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie never died. You can research Haile Selassie death hoax. All right, you'll see there never was any official grave. The man disappeared, vanished as far as they know. But an organization funded by the Soviet Union at the time, known as the Derg, who were backed by certain European Zionist interests, claimed to have invaded the royal castle at Addis Ababa and to have captured and killed His Imperial Majesty. But they never showed any body captured or killed. So they only attempted to make it appear as though they killed him, but they killed him not. The point is, Rastafari and Nation of Islam, as taught by the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, are in fact one and the same. Nation of Islam and Rastafari are in essence the same movement. These two movements both bring the resurrection redemption of returning to roots, and at the same exact conjunction of time. His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie of Ethiopia and the most honorable Elijah Muhammad left us in the very same year, 1975. See, 1975 is the year the most honorable Elijah Muhammad left us, and the year His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie left us. Right here, 1975. And His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie was crowned king in the year 1930. The very same year that Master W.D. Farad Muhammad arrived in America to begin teaching and raising up a messenger among us. Okay, so 1930 is the year when these two movements both started. 1930 is the year when His Imperial Majesty was anointed king, and 1930 is the year Master Farad Muhammad founded the Nation of Islam in America. So both movements began this very same year, 1930, and both messengers left us in the year 1975. His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie I is King Negus of the same royal bloodline, as I pointed out earlier. And this is not acknowledged or recognized by the majority of these close-minded, goofy, dogmatic, fundamentalist, orthodox, conventional religious Muslims of today. But I digress. So, getting back on topic, we want to get everyone caught up to speed to where we're supposed to be at right now. So I urge everyone to check out the Holy Book of Wonder. It's easy to obtain a copy online, and go to the website unn13.blogspot.com, Underground News Network, Republic of Rastafari. Peace, salams, and majestic salutations.